Hello, hello. It's great to see you again, and welcome back to another installment of MSP Success Spotlight. I'm your host and moderator, Ryan Ruff. It is great to see you. Great to have you back with us. Today, we've got a great episode dialed up for you. I'm really excited about today's episode. We are joined by Mr. Gary Tonniges Jr., a CPA, as well as the CEO of TriQuest Technologies that's based out of the Fort Worth, Texas area. And Gary is really bringing a unique approach to our conversations. Being a CPA, Gary does a lot of work with CFOs as well as controllers that manage the IT for their given companies. So this is a really unique conversation, one that we haven't had too much usage with on this show in talking with not only a CEO, of a MSP, but also, of course, a CPA by trade. So that being said, I want to rattle off a few more things about Gary as well as TriQuest Technologies before we bring him on and get our conversation started. So Gary, yes, being a CPA, he's also gone ahead and been writing a book. It's going to be published in early 2022. The book entitled Easy Mark: Why Business Owners Who Think Their Network is Secure Are the First to Fall Victim to Cyber Criminals, and What You Can Do Now to Stop It. So excited to see that book come out here in 22. And also Gary being featured in the fall 2021 edition of MSP Success Magazine. So a lot of great stuff that Gary Tonniges Jr. and the team over at TriQuest Technologies have been up to lately, and we're excited to bring them aboard and get the conversation rolling. So, hey, Gary, how you doing this morning? Welcome aboard the show.
Ryan, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having us on.
Oh, hey, we are privileged to have you aboard the show. And a few of the big themes, Gary, that we love to cover on this show is, of course, we want to get your industry insights, right? We want to, know what made you guys so successful, what's led to, your interactions with clients being successful over the years. But in addition to that, we really love to, get the secret sauce, that differentiating factor, what separates you guys from the pack. And given your experience in being a CPA, I'm really excited to dig into what that secret sauce is for TriQuest. But first and foremost, I want to throttle back here a moment. Give me a lay of the land right now. How are things going with your business today? Where do you see the industry going in terms of IT solutions? Let's start there, shall we?
Sure, Ryan, that's a great place to start. It's certainly an unprecedented time, with the word unprecedented having been in the news almost every day, with constant change, people moving to the cloud, everyone moving remotely through the coronavirus pandemic, and people being asked to do more with less, small businesses having cash flow issues, there's supply chain constraints, there's challenges on labor shortages, shipping, and cybersecurity, of course, on top of all of that, as people take advantage of the cracks in the system. It's difficult for small business owners to assess quality in IT people. All this rapid change has made managing IT complicated. Costs are rising because of material inputs, but also short-term thinking. All of this dynamic change has created an environment where people are having to react, and they're back on their heels, firefighting, as we like to call it. And all of these changes, as they're happening, have created a single point of failure. And there's been a somewhat of a laissez-faire attitude towards software selection within companies, or technology selection. So there's a hodgepodge mix. There's no real strategy. So that's the backdrop for our environment, I think.
Yeah, an ever-changing environment at that. You mentioned the word unprecedented. It's so true these days, and really at the forefront of this idea of unprecedented times is the importance for cybersecurity and the right practices that need to be put forth. So Gary, I think it'd be helpful for our audience that are just jumping aboard the episode with us today, if you could kind of provide a little bit of a background on yourself and where you got started, what led you into the IT solution space, and then of course, what led you to TriQuest.
I was a A&M, Texas A&M University accounting student, graduated and went to work for public accounting. When in public accounting, I was there several years, and during the course of that season, you do tax as a CPA, or young CPA, you do tax in the fall, auditing in the summer, and miscellaneous projects in between. And I got involved with IT consulting, became responsible for the firm's IT system. And that was kind of a funny story, because we had an IT company that would come into our business and fix things. And I was learning how a CPA and a professional works with our customers. And these guys who are partners called Frick and Frack. Frick and Frack would come in and they would dig around in this big aluminum silver briefcase with CDs in it and
Mm-hmm.
cables and stuff. And I'd ask them, so what was the issue? And they'd say, oh, you had gremlins in your system. And I'm gremlins in your system. That's the
Wow.
answer. Okay. And so our whole operation was shut down because we couldn't do tax returns, we couldn't do audit reports. We were stuck
Oh boy.
until the system came back online.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, I became interested in helping to take the professional approach of the CPA to go gremlin hunting, if you will, and find out a way to get the system to where it was reliable.
Mm-hmm.
And as I did it for ourselves, I began to do it for our customers. And then eventually, through the combination of learning that I love technology, love business, but also that I fell in love with entrepreneurship and the
Mm-hmm.
kind of American dream of starting your own business and owning your own destiny. And so I started TriQuest in 1997, about 24 years ago, and really on the premise of providing reliable IT to customers that demand that sort of trust and confidence in their system.
Sure, sure. Gary, I love how smooth of a transition that really was for you. I mean, you were knee deep in your world as a CPA, were faced with some cyber, security issues, and you took them head on. You took the bull by the horns to help try and get the gremlins out of the system. So I love how that transition was super smooth for you. And what we found on this show in talking with a lot of MSPs, not everybody has a smooth transition like that. Some people hop around market to market, job to job, trying to figure out what works, and then they land in IT solutions. You're similar vein, but also you've got a really unique background being a CPA, probably the first on our show to come from such a background. What do you think? What would you want people that are watching this show right now to know about your company, given your your past background as a CPA? What do you want people to know about you guys?
So our company is designed around the risks and the challenges that the small business CFO and controller are facing.
Mm-hmm.
So they have those risks that I was kind of highlighting earlier, the challenges in the environment. They need a partner that they can trust, that can come in and talk their language, speak in terms that they can understand, which means that a business acumen is as every bit as important as an understanding of the technology. And you mentioned cybersecurity several times. That's certainly an important component of
Mm-hmm.
building a reliable IT system. But there are other things that we consider to be standards that have to be dealt with daily in order to have a sense of operational excellence. And those are teamwork, learning, and planning. And the teamwork component of running an IT system, you it's just so complicated today. There a number of pieces that are moving through a company, and the number of processes that utilize technology in order to complete successfully. And it's more than one person can do. It takes a
Sure.
team of people that know what their job is, know how to make changes, when to make changes, when it's approved, when it's not approved. It
Mm-hmm.
it takes the learning so that, for example, we spend 200 hours of continuing education, company sponsored per employee every single year, and we've done that for 24 years. And the
Wow.
reason that we have that investment, people say to me sometimes, why do you spend so much money on learning and training? And my thought is, well, why wouldn't you? If
Sure.
we're paid to come in and solve problems, if we don't know what we're doing, then we're learning on your equipment.
Mm-hmm.
We need to come and deliver expertise. And then the last component is planning and the ability to look forward into the future and say, let's assess where you're at now, and let's design a solution that's going to solve the problems that you have, and the problems that you're going to have in the future, implement that solution, and then figure out how you're going to support it on the back end. So that sort of process is a process that I learned after I got my CPA. I went to TCU here local in Fort Worth
Mhm.
and did the executive MBA program and learned strategy. Fell in love with the Deming and the total quality management
Yeah.
concepts of plan, do, act, and review, and that's where that concept comes from. But leveraging that sort of business planning and acumen against the backdrop of the challenges that the CFO is facing, trying to minimize the cost of IT while without cutting off the life support system of the business.
Hmm.
One of the things that's interesting is IT has become the third largest expense for most companies,
Okay.
behind payroll, behind rent is technology. And if they're a professional service firm that works remotely, it might be the number one expense
Sure.
behind payroll. And so managing that expense, making sure that it is providing the value that the business owner is expecting to get matters.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And Gary, I appreciate you kind of walking us through that robust process that you guys really go through. Education being such a pivotal part of everything. I mean, you got to understand the problems at hands to mitigate the risks that are out there. Sometimes the writing can be on the wall, but it takes resources to put forth in order to really iron that in. So I commend you and the team over at TriQuest for putting resources towards that educational effort to make sure you guys are providing the best services you can for your clients. And speaking of clients, Gary, would you walk us through what is TriQuest Technologies' ideal client? What does that look like?
The first and most important thing is that they demand reliable IT.
Mm-hmm.
And the demand word is so important because they have to they have to be willing to put in the time and the money and the resources that it takes to build a reliable IT system. It's not something that's done casually. It's a long-term approach towards managing technology and building processes, identifying those processes within the business that rely on the technology, training people, building documentation, support systems, after hour support calls for emergency contacts when they're needed, disaster recovery systems, all of these kinds of concepts that we utilize in every other facet of business and just applying it to technology. So complex environments,
Mm-hmm.
people that demand reliable IT, they're interested in turning IT from a cost center to an investment, and they were looking forward to working with a partner that they can trust, somebody who's reliable, that's going to be around for a long time.
Sure. And Gary, one of the biggest things that I want to make sure we hit on is given your background as a CPA, I understand that you guys at TriQuest do a lot of work with CFOs and controllers of, those that manage the IT at their companies already. Talk to me about how your background, I'm sure as a CPA, really lends itself to a successful relationship in working with companies, CFOs, and then, like I said, the controllers of IT.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think shared language, a common background, a
Mm-hmm.
common sense of approach goes a long way towards helping bridge the gap between what the controller or CFO that's responsible for making the investment decisions in IT, but they don't have the time or the interest really to learn the technology well enough to really make an informed decision, which leaves a gap where they have to be able to still garner enough information and insight into the trends in the industry, business best practices, what are the risks, what can they pass on and delay expenditures on, what do they have to do now, but to still feel a sense of confidence. And that takes a trusted partner.
Mm-hmm.
And trust is something that I like to say is built bit by bit. It takes a long time to build trust. It's very easy to lose it. But when I talk to other controllers and CFOs about working with us, it becomes apparent that we share a common sense of an approach, which really is the CPA training and professional ethics background. But it's also obvious in some of the things that we do. For example, as a small business owner, I've demonstrated the ability to start and run a business for 24 years.
Right.
I've purchased and remodeled and rebuilt and own our own building in Fort Worth in downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And we have for 6 years. We're debt free. We have 6 months of operating capital. And these sorts of conservative fiscal decision making make us a better partner because we're going to be here. We're not going to be
Mm-hmm.
run out of business. We're not going to go out of business. We're not going to have high turnover because we can't afford to find the very best or to fund our training. And those sorts of common interests, common beliefs help to build trust and trust in recommendations in particular.
Sure, trust is such an important aspect of this whole process. I mean, at the end of the day, these are the IT solutions that can really, cripple a company if they're not attended to on a regular basis. So, yeah, Gary, I can really imagine that some of these conversations, maybe even the early conversations, when you're going through the onboarding process or talking with maybe even prospective clients and going through that and connecting with them on that CFO level, the CPA to CPA, I can imagine it would lend itself to just some really seamless conversation, and utilizing industry speak as well as, understanding that level of hey, I've walked the walk before, and here's what I know what it takes to get the job done. So that's a really interesting point, and I'm glad we spent some time talking about that. And Gary, one thing I'd like to do now is I'd like to pivot into what we may have teased at the beginning of the show in terms of these 5 tips to managing technology risks. These are 5 tips that you work with your clients on. They're very important, and these are suggestions that can ultimately bolster the well-being of a company's given infrastructure. So that being said, would you mind walking us through these 5 tips that somebody could be utilizing to manage their technology risks?
You mentioned trust,
Yeah.
very important. One of the things that we see a lot of times when trust has been broken by a
Mm-hmm.
previous IT company and we get involved, that the IT has become underfunded because in lieu of anything else, the decision becomes let's postpone that, let's hold on that. Do we really need to do that? And so working with a partner that you trust to guide recommendations that ultimately involve spending money,
Mm-hmm.
once that's broken, that affects that. And that's my first tip is hold your technology partner to a high standard. Work with
Sure.
somebody that has effective communication, that's a good listener. One of the best compliments that we receive is after we've interviewed someone, taken them on as a customer, worked with them for a couple of months, to hear them say, it's like you listened to what I wanted and gave me exactly that.
Man, high praise.
High praise.
Yeah.
So hold your IT provider to a high standard.
And I would imagine it lends itself to just such a rewarding partnership, really, at the end of the day, when the promises are upheld, the client feels confident about the decision they made to work with a company like TriQuest, and then ultimately know that their back end is secured. I mean, there's the risks are being mitigated, right? I mean, I would imagine the level of satisfaction on both sides of the table are through the roof, as you guys are working with your clients.
Yes, satisfaction is very high, which in turn, longevity is very high. Our
Right.
average contract runs 7 to 15 years,
Wow.
and usually we just go into renewal and sign another 5 year contract. It doesn't start
Mm-hmm.
that way, obviously, because it
Sure.
takes time to build trust. In fact, we have a 90-day no excuses, no reason to justify get out of jail free guarantee that if in the 90 days with working us that what the person believes they're going to get isn't coming true, that will help them move on to another IT provider. But I've never had anybody take
Mm-hmm.
us up on that.
Gotcha. Well, hey, that's a good thing.
Yes.
But look, hey, so Gary, yeah, let's, we had mentioned it earlier on cybersecurity being one of the big elements at play with what you guys do at, TriQuest. But I'd love to, shift into these 5 tips to manage technology risks. Obviously, cybersecurity is one, part of the conversation. There's a lot more going on in IT solutions as a whole. When you meet with your clients, when you're having conversations with them, what are these 5 tips that you tend to go through and to help manage and mitigate risk?
So holding your partner to a high standard is the first one.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is to document your technology enabled processes, going through each part of the business and looking at whether or not that technology or that important process utilizes technology in a way that if the technology was unavailable, the process shut down. For example, we have a manufacturing customer who, prior to becoming a customer, was back running doing a backup like you're supposed to do, but they were not backing up their shipping computers because they hadn't gone through and evaluated whether or not that was a technology enabled process that was critical to their business. So when they were hit with ransomware, which is a software program that made them unable to utilize those shipping computers, they were then forced to set everything back up from scratch. So they had about a 2.5 week delay in creating the shipping. And so there was no important data on there, but it was an important function.
Sure.
So we start by, and we recommend that everybody, CFOs, go through the business department by department looking for technology enabled processes and asking the question, if this underlying technology was unavailable, what would that do to the business? And that helps to guide the discussion about how much you should spend protecting that particular environment.
Sure.
The second thing, or the third thing, I guess, is to prepare a multi-year budget.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first things that we do with customers is to create a budget that looks at, this is what you're going to spend for operating expenditures and capital expenditures and or new capabilities every year for the next 3 years. And the reason that we do a 3-year rolling budget is that when you purchase a technology that's got a 5-year life, when you get into year 3, you need to start budgeting for that to be replaced. A
Sure.
lot of companies will fall short. They'll have a fund drive if they're a nonprofit, or they'll have some sort of a capital raise, capital commitment to get the new building opened, get it launched. But then after 24 months, they've neglected to plan for the end of life and the replacement of that. So that 3-year rolling budget is a big tip.
Mm-hmm.
All of this dynamism that we're talking about how the industry has changed, or the economic environment is causing short-term decision making. We've gone to the cloud quickly. A lot of people went remotely quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and this has inadvertently created single points of failure, where something like an internet connection, for example, where a single firewall goes down and then everybody can't work. And so we recommend double up for safety is our term. And the
Sure.
final thing is to reduce complexity. And I
Mm-hmm.
like to say that technology is complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And what makes technology complicated is that short-term decision making. Sitting down and identifying, these are the technologies that we use, standardizing on a set of principles and concepts is good, but then standardizing on PCs versus Mac, utilizing the technology that you need to use in a particular environment, not letting departments go out and buy whatever their flavor of the week is. Those sorts of things to reduce complexity makes technology. These are all components of making technology reliable.
Sure, absolutely. Technology being such a tool for good that we utilize, in our companies, it can help magnify so many of the things that we do. Yes, it can be complex, but it doesn't have to be at the same time. So, Gary, no, I appreciate you sharing those 5 tips for kind of mitigating risks and just really streamlining processes across the board. And I would imagine when you share these 5 tips and go through these conversations with clients, I'm sure there are some light bulb moments on the other side of the desk. Is it safe to say that?
Yes, in particular because a lot of these concepts are things that they're already familiar with.
Okay.
The accounting departments have processes for
Sure.
how they handle accounts payable. They know
Mm-hmm.
when the payroll is due and when they need their system to be up and running.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't, so we're really talking about taking those ideas of the things that they look for and applying it to other areas of the business and kind of demystifying the fact that it's the subject matter is technology, but it's still the same business concepts.
Mm-hmm. Roger that. And so,
Yeah.
Gary, you're the CEO of TriQuest Technologies. You guys have seen success over the years. 24 years, you said you've been in business, and obviously have created some wonderful relationship with clients over those basically 2.5 decades in business. Gary, there's something to be said about long relationships for with your clients, and there's also something to be said about being a distinguished MSP, and that's what we welcome onto this show are the distinguished MSPs that are really separating themselves from the pack. So Gary, if anybody's in our audience, they're listening to our conversation today, they're hearing the work that you guys have done at such a high level for your clients in and around, and of course of outside of the Fort Worth, Texas area, and maybe they're interested in pursuing a consultation or a conversation with you and your team to get the ball rolling and just open up this line of communication. How should somebody go about getting in touch with your team and ultimately scheduling maybe a consultation?
So our website, TriQuestTech.com, has a link to schedule a 10-minute discussion with me. It also has a phone number that you can call, and that's really the best way to just have a discovery call and spend a few minutes listening to what is it that your challenge is and what does success look like. How are you defining success? And I work one of my contributions back to the profession that's done so much for me is I'm the treasurer of the Fort Worth chapter of CPAs. I'm also on the Texas State Board of CPA Board of Directors and have been for 2 years. And through that relationship, I know a lot of CPAs and financial people, and I it's always fun to just talk and hear about what people are doing in business. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested in talking to me, to just give me a call and let's see what your questions are.
Of course. Well, thank you for providing that for us, Gary. And, Gary, look, we really appreciate you carving some time out of your day this morning to jump aboard the show, peel back that curtain a little bit, share some of those success principles that have led you guys at TriQuest Technologies to see that success over the past 2 decades. And look, we hope to maybe have you back on the show down the road for a further episode.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the time.
Alrighty, and look, hey, we want to take one final moment to say thank you to our audience for joining us here on today's conversation. If you liked what you saw, you liked what you heard, please feel free to like the show, comment, subscribe to it on the platform you're checking us out on, and then, of course, share this information with friends and family and business owners at that matter, because at the end of the day, Gary Tonniges and his team over at the TriQuest Technologies are doing great work in and around the Fort Worth, Texas area in the IT solution space. Gary bringing really a unique perspective with his background as a CPA. So again, Gary leaving his website there at the end of the episode for us in case you would like to schedule a consultation. But hey, for Mr. Gary Tonniges, I'm Ryan Ruff. We're going to say so long today, and we thank you so much for joining us on today's edition of MSP Success Spotlight.